The night my daughter-in-law called my home our place, I was standing 3 feet away from her. She didn't even lower her voice. She was on the phone with her mother, leaning against the kitchen counter. I'd refinished myself back in 2003, and she said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Our place, not Frank's house. Not where we're staying. Our place. Like the deed had already transferred. Like I was just a detail that hadn't been sorted out yet. I turned around and walked back down the hallway without saying a word. That was a Tuesday in September. By the following Monday morning, I had already made a phone call that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually begins. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county, and before I retired, I helped design roads that are still being driven on today. I tell you that not to brag, but because it matters to the story. I'm a man who spent his career planning things carefully, thinking ahead, making sure the foundation was solid before anything else got built on top of it. My wife Carol and I bought our house in Savannah, Georgia in 1991. We were young, nervous. I remember sitting at the closing table with damp palms, wondering if we were overextending ourselves. We weren't rich, we were just two people who believed in building something permanent. We spent years on that house, not hired crews, us. Carol painted every bedroom herself. I replaced the back porch boards one summer when the heat index hit 104 degrees 3 days in a row. We planted a magnolia tree in the front yard. The spring, our son Garrett was born. That tree is 30 years old now, taller than the roofline. Carol passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Fast and merciless in a way that still doesn't feel real when I think about it. After she died, that house became something different to me. It stopped being just a structure and became the place where our life had happened, where she had happened. Garrett is our only child. He's 34. His wife is named Nicole. She works in marketing. He manages a warehouse distribution center. They're not bad people. I want to be clear about that. But somewhere between who they were when they got married and who they became over the past few years, something shifted, and I was too close to see it clearly until it was impossible to ignore. 2.5 years ago, Garrett called me. He explained that his company was restructuring. His position wasn't eliminated, but it was being relocated from Savannah to a hub facility 40 minutes outside the city. The commute would be brutal. The timing was bad. Nicole's lease on their apartment was up in 6 weeks. He asked if they could stay with me for a few months while they figured things out. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. The house had 4 bedrooms. I was rattling around in it alone most nights. Carol would have said the same thing. 6 months, Garrett told me. Probably less. That was 2.5 years ago. They were still there. At first it was fine. Actually, for the first few months it was good. Having people in the house again helped more than I expected. Noise, movement, someone else making coffee in the morning. I hadn't realized how quiet the place had gotten until it wasn't quiet anymore. But somewhere around the 8-month mark, things started to drift. Little things at first. Nicole rearranged the living room furniture without asking. I came home from a doctor's appointment and the couch was against the wrong wall, and Carol's reading chair had been moved into the corner near the window. I didn't say anything. It was just furniture. Then she painted the guest bathroom. A gray-blue color she'd seen on some home design account she followed. She didn't ask. She told me about it after, almost as an afterthought, the way you'd mentioned changing a light bulb. I stood in the doorway of that bathroom, looking at the walls Carol had painted a soft yellow years ago, and I felt something hollow open up in my chest. I still didn't say anything. I kept telling myself they were going through a transition. I kept telling myself it was temporary. But months kept passing, and the temporary started feeling permanent. The bills were mine. The mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes, the lawn service, the pest control renewal in the spring. I covered all of it. Garrett occasionally handed me an envelope with some cash inside, but it was never a consistent amount, and it was never close to covering what I was spending. I didn't push him on it. I thought I was helping. What I was actually doing was making it too easy to stay. Now, I need to tell you about the night that changed things. Because everything I just described, the furniture, the bathroom, the bills, all of that I could have kept living with. What happened on a Friday night in October is what I couldn't walk away from. I have a box I keep on the top shelf of my bedroom closet. A plain gray box, the kind that comes with a set of dress shirts. Inside that box are photographs. Not digital. Physical prints. Pictures of Carol from before we were married. Our wedding photos. Garrett as a newborn. The four of us, Carol, Garrett, me, and my father at Garrett's high school graduation. Christmas mornings, vacations. Ordinary Tuesdays that turned out not to be ordinary at all. That box has been on that shelf since Carol died. I've taken it down maybe a dozen times. I sit on the edge of the bed, and I go through it slowly, and then I put it back. It's not a shrine. It's just the only place her face still exists in this house the way she actually looked. That Friday night, I came back from dinner with a friend around 9 o'clock. The house was loud. Garrett and Nicole had people over, 3 or 4 of her friends and their husbands. Wine bottles on the counter, music playing, the kind of gathering I hadn't been told about. I said hello, poured myself a glass of water, and went to bed early. I didn't make an issue of it. I was tired and I wasn't in the mood to socialize. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of laughter from somewhere near my end of the hallway. Then I heard my bedroom door, not being open, being closed. It was already open. I always sleep with it slightly open, and someone had just pulled it shut. I lay still for a moment. Then I got up. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. But I could hear Nicole's voice around the corner, near the linen closet. She was talking to one of her friends. I heard her say, "We're thinking this room eventually." A pause. Maybe knock through to the bathroom for a proper master suite. I stood in the dark hallway listening. The room she was talking about was my room. I went back inside and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I opened my closet to get dressed. The gray box wasn't on the top shelf. I checked the other shelves. I checked the floor of the closet. I went methodically through the room, the way you do when you're certain something is somewhere and you just need to slow down and look properly. The box wasn't there. I found it 20 minutes later on a shelf in the garage, behind a row of Garrett's power tools. Someone had moved it to the garage. I stood holding that box in my garage at 8 in the morning, and I felt something close inside me, not dramatically. Not all at once. More like a door swinging shut on a breeze, slow, and then all the way. I brought the box back into the house. I set it on my dresser, and I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and I thought about things very carefully. I wasn't angry. That's the part that might be hard to understand. I was past angry. I was somewhere quieter than angry. A place where the emotional static drops out and you're left with only clarity. The box had been moved to the garage. My photographs, Carol's photographs, had been quietly relocated to make room for someone else's plans. Plans that hadn't been discussed with me. Plans that apparently assumed a future in which I had already vacated my own bedroom. That afternoon, I found a notepad and I wrote down 3 words. Just 3. Then I picked up my phone. I called Patricia Hendricks. She's a real estate attorney I'd met through the county years ago, back when I was still working. Sharp woman. The kind who answers her own phone on weekends and doesn't waste your time. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Patricia," I said, "it's Frank Calloway. I need to understand my options." She asked me to come in Monday morning. I want to stop here for a moment, because what happened between that phone call and Monday morning matters. Garrett came downstairs Sunday evening while I was reading on the back porch. He seemed in a good mood. He offered me a beer. We sat outside together for a while, talking about football and the weather and whether my magnolia tree needed trimming. He had no idea what I was thinking. And as I sat there listening to him talk, I felt something that surprised me. Not rage, grief. Because I could still see the little boy who used to ride his bicycle in this driveway. The teenager who fell asleep watching baseball games with me on Friday nights. The 22-year-old standing at his mother's graveside looking like he didn't know how to exist in a world without her. That person was still in there somewhere. But that person had also moved his mother's photographs to the garage. And those 2 things had to both be true at the same time. Monday morning, I met with Patricia. She walked me through everything methodically. The house was mine, free and clear. Carol and I had paid off the mortgage in 2019. No shared ownership, no co-signers, no legal complications. Garrett and Nicole had no formal lease, which meant legally they were guests. Long-term guests with certain protections, but guests nonetheless. Patricia outlined a formal written notice process and what each timeline looked like. Then she said something I hadn't asked about. She mentioned the property value. I gave her a number. The number I'd been carrying in my head for years, which was roughly what Carol and I had paid plus what we'd put into it. Patricia shook her head slightly. She opened a folder and showed me recent comparable sales in my neighborhood. I stared at the number on the page for a few seconds. Then I said, "Excuse me?" She pointed to 3 separate columns. Square footage, sale price, date. I looked at each one. The house was worth nearly 3 times what Carol and I had originally paid for it. In a quiet Savannah neighborhood, 30 years of appreciation and a strong seller's market had done something I never anticipated. "That changes some of your options," Patricia said. I drove home a different way than usual. Not for any particular reason, I just needed the extra time. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Nicole's car was gone. Garrett's truck was there. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table. Garrett came in a few minutes later. He saw me sitting there and read something in my face. I don't know what exactly, because he stopped and leaned against the doorframe. "Everything okay, Dad?" I looked at him. "I've been to see Patricia Hendricks." He frowned. "The attorney?" "Yes." "What for?" "I'm exploring some options regarding the house." His expression shifted. "Options like what?" I looked down at my glass. "I'm thinking about selling." The word landed differently than I expected. Not loudly. More like something being set down on a glass surface, very still, and then the vibration spreading. Garrett stared at me. "Selling." He said it back like he wasn't sure he'd heard it correctly. "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "Dad, we're living here." "I know. You can't just—" He stopped, his jaw tightened. "You need to talk to us before you make decisions like that." I looked at him for a long moment. "I want you to hear what I'm about to say very carefully, Garrett. This is my house. I will make whatever decisions I choose about it, and I'll let you know when there's something you need to know." He left the kitchen without another word. The next 2 weeks were tense in the specific way that tension gets when no one is yelling, but everyone is aware of everything. Doors closed a little harder than necessary. Conversations stayed surface level. Meals were brief. I moved forward anyway. Patricia connected me with a listing agent she trusted, a man named David Park, mid-40s, methodical, the kind of person who sent follow-up emails within the hour. He walked through the property on a Thursday. He was thorough and professional, and he confirmed everything Patricia had said about the value. I told him I wanted to list by the end of the month. During all of this, I started noticing things I'd been too close to see before. Or maybe I'd seen them and chosen not to register them. The way Nicole referred to the back bedroom as the nursery in a conversation with her sister, not someday, not maybe, just the nursery, present tense. The way Garrett had told his friend on the phone that he was set when his friend asked about housing. The way they'd both stopped using the word temporary entirely without ever formally dropping it. The most clarifying moment came unexpectedly, the way those moments usually do. I was at my neighbor Diane's house one afternoon. She'd lived across the street for 20 years and was one of Carol's closest friends. We were having coffee, and she mentioned, very carefully, the way people do when they're not sure how much you already know, that she'd seen Garrett showing a couple of friends around the backyard a few weeks earlier, pointing things out, the garage, the porch, the magnolia tree. He told them it was a great property, Diane said. He seemed very proud of it. I set my coffee cup down. Diane looked at me. She added quietly, "He told them the plan was to eventually make it his." I thanked her. I went home. I sat in Carol's old reading chair in the corner of the living room where Nicole had moved it, and I thought about all the years I'd been waiting for Garrett to build his own life. Not because I was trying to rush him, but because I knew what it meant to build something yourself, what it did for you, the way it changed how you saw yourself and the world. I'd wanted that for him. Instead, I had made it too easy for him not to. That evening, I told Garrett that David Park would be photographing the house on Friday and that I'd need them to be out of the house for about 3 hours. He went rigid. "You actually hired someone." "David Park," I confirmed. "He'll have the listing up by next week." Garrett's voice climbed. "Dad, you can't do this. We have nowhere to go on that kind of timeline." I looked at him steadily. "I've spoken with Patricia about the proper notice process. You'll have the time that's required. I'm being fair, Garrett. This isn't fair." His voice broke slightly on the word. "This is our home." I took a long, slow breath. "This is my home," I told him. "It has always been my home." And I think somewhere along the way, we both forgot that. The listing went live on a Wednesday. David called me that afternoon. 4 showing requests by 5 o'clock. 1 inquiry from a developer he offered quickly and fairly. But something about handing the property to someone who'd tear it apart and build condominiums felt wrong. I told David I wanted to wait. The showing I remember most clearly happened on a Saturday morning. A couple named Marcus and Jenna Torres. He taught high school history. She was a physical therapist. 2 kids, 8 and 11. They'd been looking for 7 months and kept losing houses to higher offers. Their agent told David they had stretched their budget about as far as it would go. I wasn't supposed to be at the showing, but I arrived home a little earlier than planned and ended up on the back porch as they were walking through the yard. Their youngest boy ran straight to the magnolia tree and put both hands on the trunk, the way kids do with trees they immediately claim as their own. I watched that for a moment, and I thought about Garrett doing the same thing 30 years ago. Jenna Torres came to stand beside me on the porch. She looked out at the yard and said, "Someone loved this garden." She didn't know about Carol. She was just reading the yard. But she was right, and hearing it out loud was the closest I'd come to crying in a long time. I made my decision that afternoon. Not the highest offer. Marcus and Jenna Torres. When Garrett found out about the accepted offer, something shifted in him. Not toward understanding, toward desperation. He came to me twice trying to negotiate, first asking if they could stay on as renters, then suggesting he could buy the house himself, which would have required financing he couldn't come close to qualifying for at this point. I listened both times. I told him the truth both times. The sale was moving forward. There was one night, about 2 weeks before closing, when he knocked on my bedroom door after 10. I told him to come in. He sat down in the chair near the window, and he looked older than I'd seen him look before. Not the same kind of older that age produces naturally, the kind that comes from reality landing all at once. He said, "Dad, I just don't understand how you could do this to us." I didn't answer right away. I reached over to my dresser and I picked up the gray box. I set it on the bed between us. I opened it and I took out a photograph one I had found in the garage behind his power tools. A picture of Carol from the summer we bought this house. She was standing in the backyard, laughing at something off camera, holding a trowel because she'd just been planning something. She looked young and happy and completely herself. I set it on the bed facing him. He looked at it. His expression changed. I said, "That box was on the top shelf of my closet. It wasn't bothering anyone. It wasn't in the way of anything. Someone moved it to the garage." He stared at the photograph. "I'm not telling you that you're a bad person, Garrett. I'm telling you that you stopped seeing me. You stopped seeing this house as the place where your mother's life happened. You started seeing it as inventory, as something waiting to become yours." He didn't argue. That told me everything. I said, "I love you. I have never stopped loving you. But love is not the same as surrender." He left without responding. Closing day was a bright Thursday in December. Cool, clear, the kind of morning that reminded me of Carol and how much she loved Georgia winters because she grew up in Minnesota and thought anything above freezing was a personal gift. Marcus and Jenna Torres arrived early. Their boys ran into the backyard immediately. Their older one was already climbing into the magnolia tree's lower branches by the time the paperwork was being signed inside. I watched from the window for a moment. David handed me the keys. The Torres family's agent was all smiles. Patricia was there to represent my interests. Everything was in order. Garrett and Nicole had moved out 10 days earlier. Not warmly, but they'd moved. They found a rental about 20 minutes across town. I heard through a mutual family acquaintance that the adjustment was difficult, the rent was real, the responsibilities were real, and the future wasn't being handed to them. I hoped, privately, that those difficulties would teach them what I hadn't been able to. As I walked through the house one last time before handing over the keys, I stopped in the doorway of the master bedroom. The gray box was tucked under my arm. I'd packed it 3 days earlier, carefully, wrapping each photograph in tissue paper like something breakable. Because it was. I stood there in the empty room for a moment. I thought about Carol. I thought about the 31 years of mornings that had happened in this room. I thought about how strange it was that a building could hold that much of a person's life, and then how strange it was to let the building go and feel, underneath the sadness, something that I could only describe as release. I said goodbye quietly, not out loud, inside where she could hear it. Then I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove south toward Hilton Head Island. I had put a deposit on a small house there 2 weeks earlier. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch, a short walk to the water. Nothing grand. But it was mine, entirely mine, in a place where every room held only the future. The first morning I woke up there, I made coffee, took it out to the porch, and watched the ocean move in the early light. No tension, no footsteps I had to negotiate around. No quiet resentments filling the corners of every room. Just the water and the birds and the particular peace that comes when you finally put down something you'd been carrying so long you forgot you were still carrying it. I won't pretend everything was resolved. Sons and fathers aren't fixed that quickly. There were weeks of silence. The holidays were harder than I expected. I spent Thanksgiving with my brother's family in Charlotte, and it was fine, but it wasn't the same, and I knew it wouldn't be for a while. Then in late February, on a Sunday afternoon, Garrett called. I looked at his name on the screen for a moment before I answered. "Hey," I said. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded different, more careful, more like himself from 10 years ago, before things had drifted. He said he'd been thinking a lot. He said Nicole and he had been talking. He said something I didn't expect him to say, and he said it without being prompted. "I think we took advantage of you. Not on purpose. But we did." I didn't say anything. I let him keep going. He talked for a while, about how easy it had gotten to stop seeing the situation clearly when you were comfortable inside it. About how the longer they stayed, the more it had started to feel like permanence, not because I had ever said it was, but because he'd let himself believe what was convenient. About how he'd been angry at me when the house sold, genuinely angry, and how he'd spent months figuring out that the anger was mostly at himself. He asked if we could talk more. In person, I told him yes. I told him I was in Hilton Head. I told him the porch faced east and the coffee was good in the morning. He drove down the following Saturday. We sat outside for 3 hours. We didn't resolve everything real relationships don't resolve in a single conversation, especially after real hurt. But we talked honestly in a way we hadn't in years, maybe longer than years. At one point he asked me what made me finally do it. Not emotionally, he understood that part now. He meant practically. What was the moment I picked up the phone? I thought about it. I thought about the word "our place." I thought about the gray box in the garage. I thought about the night in the hallway when I heard Nicole describe my bedroom to her friend as a future project. But what I said was simpler than all of that. I told him, I realized I'd spent 3 years being careful not to inconvenience people who were living rent-free in my home. And I figured out that wasn't love. That was just me being afraid of conflict. Those aren't the same thing. He nodded slowly. He looked out at the water. I said, "Your mother never let me confuse the two. She would have spoken up long before I did." He smiled a little at that. "So would she?" he said. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I laughed with my son. I don't tell this story because I think I handled everything perfectly. I didn't. I waited too long. I accepted too much without saying anything. I let years pass thinking that patience was the same as kindness, when really I was just avoiding a conversation I should have had much sooner. But here's what I've come to believe, and I'll leave you with this. There is a version of love that protects people from discomfort, and there is a version that requires them to meet you at the level of respect you've earned. The first version feels generous, but over time, it teaches people that you are unlimited, that your house, your resources, your peace of mind will simply continue regardless of how they're treated. The second version is harder. It costs something. Sometimes it costs you months of silence and a Christmas spent far from someone you raised. But in my experience, and in the experience of a lot of men my age who've been through something similar, the second version is the one that actually saves a relationship. Because some lessons can only be taught by consequences, and some homes are only really valued once they're gone. Setting limits with someone you love doesn't mean you love them less. It might mean you love them more, honestly. Frank didn't sell that house to punish his son. He sold it to stop pretending that silence was the same as peace. And in doing so, he gave Garrett something no amount of comfort ever could, the chance to finally grow up and the possibility of a real relationship on the other side of it. A small note for you, this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment while sharing a life lesson worth carrying with you.